What if you woke up in a lab and realized you were never human to begin with? The cold metal table beneath his back, the sterile white lights, the scent of something wrong in the air. He wasn't injured, he wasn't sick, he was an experiment. And she, the woman with white hair and inhuman eyes, wasn't here to heal him. She was here to observe, to push him, to break him, to make him evolve. He was not the first. The others failed. They screamed, they mutated, they died. And now it was his turn. The restraints snap, the cage unlocks, the final test begins, and the only way out is to win. Darkness. It wasn't the comforting kind, the one you find when drifting off to sleep. No, this darkness was suffocating, pressing against his skin like a second layer of flesh. It was wrong, cold, artificial. Then came the lights, not the natural glow of the sun, nor the flickering warmth of a candle. These lights were sterile, unfeeling, glaring down at him with unnatural brightness. A soft beep echoed in the void. Then another. Then a voice. Mild neurological activity detected. Subject 013 is regaining consciousness. His breath caught in his throat. Where am I? He tried to move. Nothing happened. His body refused to respond, trapped in some invisible paralysis, as if he weren't in control of his own limbs anymore. Panic clawed at his mind, but even that felt distant, disconnected. Something was holding him down. Something was controlling him. A cold sensation crawled across his skin as his senses sharpened. He was lying on a metal table, naked from the waist up, strange wires running from his chest to a machine beside him. The slow, rhythmic beeping continued, its sound somehow alien. Then he saw her. She stood at the foot of his bed, staring down at him with curiosity. No, fascination. A woman, but not human. Her snow-white hair cascaded down her back, glistening under the neon blue lights. Long, pointed ears twitched ever so slightly as she scanned his vitals on a floating holographic display. She looked pristine, clinical, efficient, but something about her was off. The way she held the data pad, fingers gliding over the glowing symbols. The way she never blinked, her eyes hidden behind reflective glasses that gave away nothing. He tried to speak. His throat didn't work. A small flicker of amusement crossed her face. "You are conscious," she observed. Not asked, stated, as if he were a test subject. He forced his lips apart. "Well, where am I?" She tapped her screen once, not looking at him. "You are in a controlled environment?" Her voice was smooth, clinical, devoid of empathy. He struggled against the weight on his chest. His fingertips twitched, but nothing more. Paralysis. "What is this?" His words slurred. His body felt wrong. She finally looked at him. "This?" She gestured to the room. "This is science." His mind raced. The sterile room, the wires, the paralysis, the cold, calculated way she watched him. This wasn't a hospital. It was a lab. And he wasn't a patient. He was an experiment. His blood turned to ice. "You're experimenting on me." No response, just that neutral, impassive stare. "You're experimenting on humans." Still, she said nothing, but she didn't deny it. His fingers twitched again. Slight movement, a sign, a chance. If he could just regain control, maybe he could. The alien woman tapped her screen again. A sharp, burning pain shot through his body. He convulsed, a choked scream ripping from his throat. "Don't strain yourself," she said softly, almost gently. "Your body is still adjusting." He gasped for air. The pain faded, not because it had ended, because she had let it. She controlled everything, his movements, his pain, his life. And for the first time since waking up in this nightmare, he realized something far more terrifying than the experiments themselves. She wasn't torturing him. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cruel. She was just curious. And that meant she had no reason to stop. Ever. "Rest now, subject 013. she murmured, turning away, her white coat trailing behind her. "We have a long way to go." The lights dimmed, the door hissed shut, and in the cold, sterile silence, he finally understood the truth. He wasn't a patient. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a specimen. And whatever they were testing, it wasn't finished yet. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. The moment the lights dimmed, his mind filled with questions. Where was he? How long had he been here? How many others came before him? And the worst question of all, how many survived? The soft hum of machinery surrounded him. The air wasn't fresh. It smelled manufactured, sterile, like a place where nothing lived, only functioned. And then the door hissed open. Footsteps, soft, precise, measured. He didn't have to look. He knew who it was. She was back. Vitals stable, neurological activity within expected range. Her voice was the same as before, clinical, detached. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice out. "What do you want?" She looked at him, tilting her head just slightly, like a predator studying something smaller. "To proceed." "With what?" "Your purpose." His chest tightened. "My purpose?" "I don't have a purpose," he said, voice sharp. She blinked behind her glasses, almost as if confused. "Incorrect." She raised a small device. A thin, needle-like appendage extended from it, glowing faintly blue. "You were chosen." A scream echoed in his head. Not his own, someone else's. A flash, a memory, or maybe just a hallucination. A man, tied to a table, pleading, begging, the same way he was about to. "Don't," but the needle was already in his neck. Pain. It started slow, a soft heat like a fever crawling beneath his skin. Then it burned. His veins felt like they were on fire. His muscles clenched, spasming violently. Every nerve in his body screamed. And yet, he was still paralyzed. He couldn't move, couldn't thrash, couldn't even scream. He was trapped inside his own body, forced to endure whatever the hell she was doing to him. "Interesting," she murmured, watching the data stream across her tablet. "Cognitive resistance is higher than anticipated. But the biological response..." She paused. Then with something almost like satisfaction, she whispered, "It's working." He wanted to ask, wanted to demand. What was working? What had she done to him? But all he could do was lay there, body on fire, muscles stiffening like his own skin was hardening from the inside out. He gasped for air, feeling his heartbeat pound, pound, pound against his ribs. Too fast, too strong. Something was changing. "Subject 0 don't," she said softly, adjusting her glasses. "Do you feel it?" Feel what? The agony? The terror? The way his own heartbeat felt alien now, like it didn't belong to him anymore. She crouched beside him, her cold fingers brushing over his wrist, right over the pulse that wasn't slowing down. "Your body is adapting," she said, almost with curiosity. "Fascinating." His chest heaved. "What are you doing to me?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the tablet down and removed her glasses. For the first time, he saw her eyes, and something inside him recoiled. They weren't cold. They weren't inhuman. They were too human. That was the worst part, because something behind them was not. "Tell me, subject 013, she murmured. "Do you know what makes you different from the others?" His breathing shuddered. I don't understand." She smiled. It wasn't kind. It wasn't cruel. It was knowing. Like she was waiting for him to figure it out. She leaned closer. "You are the only one who survived." His mind froze. His stomach twisted. The only one? The only one? She reached for his face, tracing a cold finger along his jawline, like she was inspecting her work. "I'm going to show you something," she whispered. "And then, maybe, you'll start to remember." She turned, waving a hand toward the screen on the far wall. The image flickered to life, and he saw them. People, strapped to beds like his. Their bodies twisted, deformed, mutated beyond recognition. Some weren't moving, some were, but they weren't human anymore. The images changed, flickering through different stages of transformation. Muscle hardening into armor, skin splitting open to reveal something else beneath, eyes turning black, hands curling into claws. And then, the last image, a room full of bodies, all of them dead, except for one, him. "You were the first success," she said, voice soft. "But you won't be the last." The screen flickered. The room felt smaller. And for the first time since waking up in this nightmare, he finally understood. This wasn't just an experiment. This was a process, and it wasn't over yet. Not for him, not for the others, not until they were all changed. And the worst part? He wasn't sure he could stop it, because it had already begun. His body wasn't his anymore. The pain had faded, but the changes remained. Something was different. Something was wrong, and he could feel it, crawling under his skin, spreading through his veins like an infection. Not an illness, a mutation, a transformation, and he wasn't sure he wanted to stop it. The alien woman stood beside his bed, her expression unreadable. She watched him as if he were a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. "How do you feel?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost expectant, like she already knew the answer. He swallowed hard. His heartbeat sounded different, deeper, stronger, like something else was beating beneath his ribs. "I feel strange." She tilted her head. "Strange?" He licked his dry lips. "I feel stronger, but also..." He stopped. He couldn't describe it. His thoughts were clearer, sharper, his breathing deeper, slower. His senses were heightened. He could hear the hum of the machines, feel the subtle vibration in the air, smell the faintest trace of metal and antiseptic. Everything was too much. "Your neurological functions are enhancing," she said, nodding slightly. "Good. The process is advancing faster than expected." He clenched his fists. The muscles in his arms shifted. Something inside him twisted, tightened, adapted. "What are you turning me into?" She met his eyes, and for the first time, she smiled. Not a cold smile, not a cruel one. Something worse, something proud. Something better. Then the restraints snapped. Not because she released them, not because they malfunctioned, because he broke them, without even realizing it. His breath hitched as he stared at his own hands, hands that no longer looked human. The skin was still his, but the veins beneath it pulsed with something unnatural, something stronger. What did you do?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to, because he already knew. She didn't change him. She activated him. Memories slammed into his mind, flashes, needles, screams, a darkened lab. Him, strapped down, injected, transformed, erased. He had been here before. He had felt this before. This wasn't new. This was waking up. The realization hit him like a freight train. "You didn't just experiment on me." His voice was shaking, not with fear, with rage. "You created me!" Her eyes gleamed behind her glasses. "Now you're starting to understand." His heart pounded. His fingers twitched. He could feel something inside him waiting, watching, wanting to break free. "I'm not your experiment," he growled. "You always were," she replied. "You just forgot." She raised her tablet and tapped the screen. The walls shuddered, lights flickered. Then somewhere down the hall, a door unlocked. "Let's see how well you've adapted," she murmured. The door clicked open, a sound so soft, so subtle, yet it sent a wave of dread crawling down his spine. She had released something, or maybe she had just released him. His breath came slow, controlled. He could feel it now. His body was different. Muscles that didn't burn with exhaustion, nerves that responded too fast. His hearing was sharper, his vision clearer. He could see the individual strands of her white hair, hear the faint hum of the electricity running through the walls. Everything was too much, and yet he felt unstoppable. "Go on," she whispered, stepping back, watching. The test is about to begin. The lights flickered. A low growl rumbled from beyond the open door. Something was inside that room, waiting, watching, something like him. His fingers curled into fists. "What did you put in there?" She didn't answer. She just smiled. Then the thing moved. Fast. Too fast. A shadow lunged from the darkness, claws scraping against metal, teeth flashing. He had seconds to react, but his body moved on its own. Instinct, not human instinct, something else. He dodged before his brain could register the motion, twisting, shifting, too fast for a normal man. The thing landed where he had been standing a moment ago. He turned and finally saw it. It was him. Or at least it had been. A human body, twisted, warped, changed. Its skin was thick, blackened like charred flesh. Veins glowed faintly beneath the surface, the same unnatural glow he had seen beneath his own skin. Its mouth stretched too wide, filled with jagged teeth, and its eyes, they were still human, still aware, still screaming. It charged again. Faster than any normal human, faster than he should have been able to react to. But his body moved before he could think. He caught its wrist. A mistake. Because the moment he touched it, memory slammed into his head. Flashes, a lab, needles, screams, a man strapped down. "Please, no more. I don't want to change." Her voice, "You will be perfect." A needle sinking into flesh. A final blood-curdling scream. Then silence. Back in the present, the thing twisted free, snarling in rage. His grip had left bruises on its mutated skin. It felt pain. It still felt pain. It was still human underneath. His stomach lurched. This wasn't a monster. This was one of the others, one of the failures. And now, she wanted to see if he would be different. "Fight back," she whispered, "or you'll end up just like him." The creature lunged, and this time, he didn't run. The creature lunged. Its movements were too fast, too erratic. It wasn't attacking out of strategy. This was pure, uncontrollable instinct. A broken mind inside a twisted body. It was what she had turned him into, what she had wanted him to become. His body reacted before his mind could process it. He sidestepped just in time, his hands shooting out, grabbing the creature by its throat. It snarled, clawing at his arm, but its strength was nothing compared to the power coursing through his own limbs. He squeezed. Bones cracked. The thing wheezed, its eyes wild, flickering between rage and fear. And then, memory slammed into his skull. A voice. "Please, don't let them do this to me." A face. It was human once. It had a name, a family, a life, and now it was this. Because of her, because of the experiments, because it had failed. His grip loosened. The creature sensed it, and it attacked. Teeth sunk into his shoulder. Pain exploded through his body. But it wasn't just pain, it was wrong. His blood burned where the creature's saliva touched it. His vision blurred for half a second. It wasn't just mindless, it was spreading something. A virus, a mutation, the same thing coursing through his veins. He couldn't let it win. He couldn't become like it. So he stopped holding back. He twisted his grip, hard. A sickening snap echoed through the cold room. The creature went still. The body dropped to the floor, and everything was silent again. His breathing was ragged. His body shook. Not from exhaustion. He wasn't tired. Not from fear. He wasn't afraid. But from something worse. He had enjoyed it. For the first time in his life, he had felt strong. He turned slowly to face her. She was still standing there, tablet in hand, watching, studying, like a scientist observing a lab rat. "Fascinating," she murmured, tapping the screen. "Your body didn't reject the transformation, unlike the others." His fist clenched. "You knew this would happen. I suspected. You set that thing on me. You needed to be tested." His nails dug into his palms. "You wanted me to kill it." She smiled. "You wanted to kill it." He froze. She took a step closer, gaze locked onto his. Didn't you? He couldn't answer, because she was right. Because in that moment, holding its throat, feeling its life slip away, he had felt in control, and she had been waiting for that. Why? His voice was barely above a whisper. She tilted her head. Because you're the only one who can. Can what? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned, swiping across her screen. Another door unlocked. A distant hissing sound filled the air. Not just one, multiple. The air suddenly smelled different. She turned back to him. This was just the beginning. Something moved in the darkness beyond the door, and this time, it wasn't alone. The hissing grew louder. It wasn't a sound made by machines. It wasn't the hum of electrical currents or the soft whisper of artificial air vents. It was breathing, but not human, not anymore. His body tensed, every muscle ready to react. His heartbeat wasn't fast. It was steady, controlled, prepared. The transformation had done something to him, something unnatural, something powerful. And whatever was in that darkness, it was just like him, or worse, it was the ones who didn't survive the change. A single red light flickered on, then another, then dozens, eyes watching, waiting. A deep growl rumbled through the open corridor, low, inhuman, hungry. His instincts screamed at him, run. But he didn't move, not this time, not anymore, because deep inside, something was awake now, and it wasn't afraid. Then they charged. The first one lunged from the shadows, claws slashing for his throat. He sidestepped effortlessly, too fast. Before he even thought about it, his hand shot out, grabbing the creature's wrist and twisting. Snap! The thing shrieked, its arm bending the wrong way. But it didn't stop. It didn't even hesitate. It felt no pain. It lashed out with its other arm, jagged claws inches from his face. But this time, he didn't dodge. He caught it. Crack. Another limb broken. The thing screamed, but not in pain. It was rage. Pure, uncontrolled rage. And the others were coming. They swarmed him. 5, 10, more. He moved like an animal, instincts guiding him. Not human instincts. Something new. Something primal. They were fast, but he was faster. They were strong, but he was stronger. He tore through them. Bones cracked. Limbs twisted. Bodies fell. But they kept coming. And for the first time since waking up in this nightmare, he smiled, and she watched. She never moved, never intervened, never spoke. She just observed, taking notes, recording everything. And when the last creature collapsed at his feet, twitching, gasping, dying, she finally spoke. "You exceeded expectations." He panted, chest rising and falling. His hands dripped blackened blood. His vision was sharper than ever. His body felt invincible. "What the hell did you do to me?" She smiled. "This is only phase 1. She tapped her screen. A new sound filled the air. A roar, louder, deeper, more intelligent. And this time it wasn't coming from the shadows. It was coming from behind her, from something she had just released. The roar shook the room. This wasn't like the others. This sound wasn't mindless. It wasn't a creature driven by instinct or hunger. It was something worse, something that knew exactly what it was, and it was coming straight for him. His breath slowed, his senses stretched outward, feeling everything. The vibrations in the floor, the shift in air pressure, the way the cold, metallic scent of blood was quickly replaced by something thicker, heavier, something that smelled like dominance, the sound of heavy footsteps, the distant click of metal restraints unlocking, and then silence, a stillness that made his muscles coil like a loaded spring. She had released it, the thing she had been saving for last, his final test. It stepped into view, not a mindless mutant, not one of the broken ones. This was different. This one had survived. It was bigger, stronger. Its body was covered in thick, blackened armor-like flesh, moving like liquid steel. Its eyes, they weren't red like the others. They were intelligent, calculating. It was like looking into a mirror, a version of himself that had evolved further, faster, a version that had already won. And then it spoke. "You are not the first." Its voice was deep, unnatural, like it was speaking through layers of shifting sound. "You will not be the last." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The creature wasn't here to talk. Neither was he. They both knew how this would end, with one of them dead, and the other one walking out of this room as something new. The biologist watched from the side, her expression neutral. She didn't interfere. She never did. This wasn't a fight. It was an evaluation. Would he survive? Would he evolve? Or would he fail like the others? She tapped her screen. The walls around them shifted, rising into something bigger. A proper arena, no restraints, no advantages, just the two of them. A battle for dominance, for the right to exist. The other creature moved first, faster than anything else he had faced. A blur of motion, claws slicing through the air, aimed straight for his throat. But this time, he was ready. He dodged, barely, feeling the air shift as the strike missed by inches. His own body moved in response, striking, twisting, attacking. But it was waiting for that. It caught his wrist midair, and it squeezed. Too strong. His bones nearly cracked under the force, pain lancing up his arm. He twisted free just in time. But he knew now, this wasn't like before. The others were wild, mindless, predictable. This thing, it was a predator, and he was still learning how to hunt. They circled each other, neither moving recklessly, neither wasting energy. The fight wasn't about who was stronger. It was about who was better. His body was changing, adapting, but so was his opponent. It had been through this before. It knew the process. It had survived longer. But he wasn't about to lose. Not now. Not when he was finally awake. The next attack came from him. He pretended to go low, only to snap up at the last second, aiming for its throat. A feint, a trick, and it worked. The creature moved to block, too slow. His fist connected with its jaw. A loud crack echoed through the room. It stumbled back, and in that moment, he saw something in its eyes. Recognition. It had underestimated him. That was its mistake. He wouldn't give it another chance. He launched himself forward, using everything he had. Speed, power, instinct. He grabbed its head, twisted, and snapped its neck. Silence. The body collapsed. Heavy, final, his own chest rose and fell. Not from exhaustion, not from fear, but from certainty. He had won. He had evolved, and she had known he would. The biologist smiled. Perfect. She tapped her screen once more, and the final door opened. Shall we begin phase 2? The room is silent now. The bodies of the failed experiments lay motionless around him. The air is thick with the scent of blood, metal, and something unnatural. He won. But this wasn't victory. It was just the next step. The woman watches him from the shadows, her expression unreadable. She doesn't look disappointed. She doesn't look surprised. She looks pleased. You were meant to survive. You were meant to become more. The final door unlocks, and beyond it, something waits. Something stronger. Something worse. This was never about escaping. This was about what came next. Because the experiment, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you want more terrifying, mind-bending, sci-fi horror stories, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. There are more secrets to uncover, more nightmares to witness, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.